So I'm going to do this with the Moto inventory also. And then we're going to see how you can handle multiple errors, because we know that we could get up to, what, 5, right? With the required data. All right, so let's go back to the Moto inventory service. And just like before, there's a boat horn. We're going to create an exception handler class in the controller package again. Call this one my controller exception handler. And so just like before, we want that REST controller advice again. And just like before, we want to have our request mapping. So all that stuff, that's just the same as the last exception handler. And just like before, include our exception handler annotation, which we'll put on our method. Method argument not valid exception dot class. So we're handling a different exception this time. This guy, method argument not valid exception. Which is what this guy was throwing. Thanks to all these annotations and that valid on our controller over here. And we're going to give back a 422 this time, which is a unprocessable entity. Just like before, we're going to have a method that returns a response entity that's full of VND errors. And we can name our method whatever we want. I'm going to call mine Moto validation error. So it's a method. Let's call it do Moto validation error because it's supposed to be a verb. And just like before, it's taking that exception that we're handling on the exception handler. And the request again, so we can get the information about the request for reporting back to the client. All right, so this is a little bit different. Let's see. I'm going to make sure I don't forget to mention. 422 is unprocessable entity. We're going to create the shell of the method. The name's arbitrary. The second parameter is web request. We covered all of that. All right, so when we're trying to map our motorcycle to an actual motorcycle, there's this binding result object that is available on the exception. So this guy, binding result, is the one that holds the validation errors. It's just when we go back. What's this binding? It's right there in a comment. So that guy has validation errors, so we're going to go We're going to get the result, and we're going to look at the errors there. This is all available in the Java doc as well. When we look up method argument not valid exception, it'll tell us that you can get a binding result. Should we look at it? I'm going to look at it. You can't stop. Only hope to contain me. Current Spring Framework, great. Tiny font. Get binding result. Returns the results of the failed validation. Let's go look at binding result. What does that guy have? Still got a small font. It's an interface. Ooh. That's kind of interesting. Let's go back. Get binding result returns an interface. It doesn't return an instance of a class. It returns an instance of something on an interface. It's an example of what? Everyone's favorite topic. Polymorphism. Polymorphism! Take a shot. And what is a binding result? It's a general interface that represents binding results. What's a binding result? Who was the one that was complaining about words in the dictionary that are defined as themselves? Right. Everyone, I mean, I have that problem too. So a binding result is when Spring is trying to bind a value, trying to connect a value to something that's supposed to hold that value. That's what binding is. It's a result holder for a data binder. All right, I got a question. Interface, we'll get back to in a second, but if binding result is an interface, we still get back an object from our get binding result. What does it mean about that object? Binding result is an interface, but the thing that we get back from this method is actually an object. That object implements the binding result interface. So if something implements an interface, what does it do? It defines all the methods on that interface, right? That's how an interface works. We haven't talked about that in a while. Bringing it back home. That's how the stuff works. Okay, so a binding result, it gives the result, it extends errors, it gives the, generates the binding results. So when we try to take a value and put it in a Java object, it says whether or not that worked. And we can get our errors out of it. Okay, let's go back to the code. Trying to bind our JSON data to a Moto object. All right. Here we go. Binding results. Any errors we have? We have this field errors object or set of objects. It's a list. A list of errors. It's a list of field errors. And we're going to take this thing, change them, we're going to translate them into these VND errors. Once again, we see our polymorphism in action again. We've got this list, which is an interface, and we've got array list, which is a class that implements that interface. Okay. All right, getting closer. Now, we've got a bunch of field errors from our bind result. We could have several. We might have, well, when we get here, we've got at least one. So I'm going to use my enhanced for loop. On field error, which is a list. Good old, just like being at home. And it takes for just like the old days of last week. All right. Way back in mid-May. So for every field error, I'm creating a new VND error. And this is how we did it in the range service as well. Except this message, instead of being the exception message that we're passing to it, this is the field error message. So we were just handling one exception at a time in the other exception handler, so we could just get the message off of that exception. But since we have a list of errors coming in that we're dealing with on this get field errors guy, we have to deal with a list of messages as well. So each error in the list has its own message that we're going to create our VND error out of. So there I created a new VND error and I've got a list of them. So I'm going to add to that list. Boom. All right, now I've taken my field errors and I've translated them into VND errors. And since I've got to return a response entity with a VND errors type, I've got to create one of those. And then I'm going to make my return value. I'm going to see what happens now when I run this motorcycle inventory project. Did it work? Didn't complain. Started 2.111. Who's feeling lucky? Well, are you, punk? All right, let's see. Can't run it from here. It's my motorcycle inventory service, so I've got to run it from Postman. Not to be confused with Spider-Man. Postman. All right. All of this is going to work fine. Let's take the happy cat to make sure that it works like it's supposed to. I've got my Hyundai Doug from 1979. All right, now what's going to happen when I don't pass in a make? What did I say? Can't be empty? We'll just make it up. What's going to happen? Ooh, a lot less text. All right, there's one error. Let's send in two errors. That is a fake one. You're a criminal. There it is. Look at that. How awesome. Ooh, this links thing. How hate OASE. This allows you to pass some links back. Okay, so what are our takeaways here? Here's one thing. All this code, you're not going to know the code off the top of your head unless you've got a photographic memory, in which case you need to find a job that's different than this job. Because you are far more valuable if you can memorize all that stuff. You can memorize so many more things. Now we've got code to do this. What I would do in my job is I would have a reference to this code so I would know where to find it and I could reuse it and I could copy and paste it and just use the parts that apply. That's the way a lot of this stuff is going to work. Ideally, you'll understand what's going on, because when it doesn't work, your boss is going to come to you and say, why doesn't this thing work? I want you to fix it. And then at that point,
you're all behind and you're trying to figure out what's going on. So when you're using someone else's code, try to understand what it's doing before you just put it in, because there can be some unintended consequences. There can be some inefficient algorithms. There can be some things that you're doing that could be technically using an illegal license. So you want to understand what's going on. But after you understand what's going on, you can use the code. On homework tonight, you're going to have to do some validations. Use this code.